Those days are long gone. But it also describes a relationship that I have that's very near and dear and important in my life. So those are the words that I use. I know that you guys use all different kinds of words, and they're all welcome here. One of the things at the Autism Network is that we think that it's important that we allow everyone to pick the words to describe themselves, first and foremost, but then also pick the words that describe their relationship to other things in their environment that are important to them, which may have something to do with autism or may not. But I don't want to be the person deciding the words for someone else. I want, everybody to feel comfortable to identify how they want to identify. I know it's a dicey subject that some of you are like, but this term is wrong. Wrong for you, but maybe right for somebody else is what I'm always, that's the neighborhood I'm coming to you from. Hey, I want to remind you that here at the Autism Network, everything we do, our mission here is to provide information and inspiration to the larger autism community, which starts with individuals who are themselves on the autism spectrum, but it includes absolutely everyone who loves them. And we know now more than ever that it is critical and important that we work together, that we be good allies and accomplices to make sure that we ensure the rights of individuals who identify as being somewhere, whatever words you use, on the autism spectrum. So our shows are meant for that whole community, especially for that reason. That's what we're here doing. We're live right now on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and about a dozen other sites. Our fabulous Chris Desmond. Hello, Nicholas McMillan. No, McMahill. Excuse me. Sorry. I even have a cough drop and I'm still coughing. I'm so thrilled that you're here. I know you're going to love our guest today. I started to say our fabulous Chris Desmond is going to show you some of the different ways that you can be watching the show, some of the different ways that you can participate. I want to remind everybody that we do the live show, and it's, as I said, going out to you right now live. What's today's date? Today's date is the February 12th. We're almost to Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. It's coming out to you live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, a dozen other sites. And we really want to encourage you. We have a very robust YouTube channel that has been around for more than 14 years. We have been doing shows, and they are all archived there that you can go back and look what it looked like when my hair was not white. It was dyed. But you can go back and look. You can see the many different guests that we've had. You can... our guest that's on today, you can go back and see when he was on 10 years ago and get a perspective for, life changes, life goes on, right? So all that's available to you and it's free, but we know that the lion's share of you will be listening in podcast, and that's great. We want you to be able to consume this content however you want to consume it. We are a free download wherever you get podcasts, right? But we also know that the free means that it's coming with advertisements. And we hope that you embrace that and acknowledge that, and that that's okay for you. If for some reason it's not, then we encourage you to please go to glow.fm/autismlive. For $5 a month, you can pay for a subscription to our channel. And what will happen is that anytime we do anything on the Autism Network, Ask Dr. Doreen, Autism Live, Let's Talk Movies, Today's Hyperfixation, any of that will automatically, when we broadcast it, it will show up in your inbox, and it will be ad-free because you've paid that $5 monthly subscription. I do want to point out that if you want to pay it for a year, it's actually less expensive than $5 a month. So that's up to you. But those are some of the different ways. I also want to encourage you, we're coming up on April Autism Awareness Month, and it's not just awareness, right? It's all the A's, action, acceptance, advocacy. I love all the A words surrounding April, which is also an A word. And it's a time when there's an opportunity for autism to be a little bit more in the spotlight. It gets a little bit more of the stage than maybe it does the other 11 months. For those of us in the community, that sometimes feels a little weird, right? If we're living with things every day, and then all of a sudden there's like a month where we're just going to notice it a little bit more. But let's remember that part of that is for the benefit of the rest of the world, that until we get to the point where everyone in the world accepts with love and charity and consideration and empathy individuals who are neurodivergent, then our work isn't done, right? And we have a long way to go to get to that acceptance. It's a dicey road, right? Especially right now. I don't want to get political. But we need to get to the point where there's a deeper understanding and acceptance. So as we approach April, and we're going to be doing a lot of special shows in April, I do want to point out that one of the things that I do want to encourage our community to do is to shore up the things that, if something is helping you, whether it's us or somebody else. For us, if there's anything that we've ever done that has helped you, please like, share, subscribe, review, because that's what keeps us going. That's what makes it possible for somebody else to find us at 2 o'clock in the morning. But if it isn't us, if it's somebody else, if there's an organization that's really been helping you, take the time to push them forward in whatever way you can in April so that others can find them. I just want to say, as a parent, nobody handed me a book and said, hi, here's all the resources that you need and you'll have that, right? I had to learn things from other people, and I found organizations, and I found them because other people said, hey, this is good. So, use your voice, amplify your words to let other people know what's helping you. And if nothing is helping you, I'm glad you're here, because then hopefully we can help you find other resources, because you are not alone. Do you know what I say? Hold hands, si se puede, we can do this. All right. Having said all that, it's time for us to do the jargon of the day and talk a little bit about this, which I think is a great precursor before we have Nick joining us on the show. So you guys know that when we started doing the show, we started doing jargon of the day because it was so overwhelming. And if you went to a meeting, especially at school, and they would just say all these terms, and you just felt like, I felt like giving up, because I was like, I don't understand 9/10 of what you're saying. And I tried stopping them and saying, what does that mean? What does that mean? But, at a certain point, it just, you lose the thread. So we wanted to just take, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? We wanted to take one jargon term every day, give you the actual definition that was filled with all the other jargon, and then give you a working definition. Over the years, the definitions have gotten better. We're still giving you 2 definitions so you can compare and contrast and really maybe get a gripster on what it is we're talking about. So today, it's funny because I feel like this is something that we need to be talking about every day, but I don't know. It just doesn't get talked about as much as it should be anymore. So the term is EIBI. That's our jargon term for the day. Let's take a look at our first definition and see what we can make heads or tails of here. EIBI stands for Early Intensive Behavioral Intervention. It's a treatment based on the principles of applied behavior analysis. It's delivered from multiple years at an intensity of 20 to 40 hours per week. It is one of the more well-established treatments for ASD, and that comes from the National Institutes of Health.gov. I will be honest with you. I don't know if today, if I were to look this up, if that definition would still be there. This definition was taken off the website, probably more than a year ago. It's almost like I want to go and look right now and see what NIH does say about EIBI, because the websites are all changing, right? But there's a couple of things I want to call out here. This idea of early intensive behavioral intervention, and they give you sort of a criteria, multiple years. This is not a weekend or a 6-week program, of an intensity of 20 to 40 hours per week, and it's one of the more well-established treatments for ASD. Okay, thank you, National Institute of Health.gov. Let's look at the next one and see what it says. EIBI, and this is from raisingchildren.net from Australia. This therapy promotes learning, skill development, and behavior change by breaking tasks into small steps that are easier to learn. As children learn each step, they're praised and rewarded. Challenging behavior is ignored when it happens. Ooh, wait, what? I thought that this was very interesting and maybe a little controversial because this is not what we would see the definition being someplace here in the United States. And yet it's not wrong. There's nothing in here that's wrong at all. But these are elements that we don't necessarily talk about. So let's break this down, shall we? EIBI, let's all remember that the phrase that we used to say, early intervention, early intervention, early intervention. That's what everybody used to talk about. But that's tied to science. That's not just somebody's opinion. That wasn't just a slogan to put on T-shirts. There were studies that were done, and there were studies that were replicated hundreds and hundreds of times, if not thousands of times, that showed that if we started working with kids that were younger, and that was a key thing, that when kids are younger, if you stop and think about it, that the brain is, there's a couple of factors. The brain is more plastic when children are younger, so they're more adept at learning. It also means if you start younger, you're not as far behind to catch up if you're behind on a skill, right? That was critical. But also, a key point is that kids that are younger, they have more disposable time, I guess is a word that I would want to use. That once kids go to school, there are set times of the day that are taken up. And I don't like the term disposable, but at discretionary times during the day where they have more opportunities to do different things. So we see kids that, typically developing kids, that the parents double down during that period of time before preschool and teach them other languages. They teach them math skills, things like that. A lot of times that's drilled and not fun. Well, for ABA, it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be rewarding. I love the sentence about as children learn each step, they're praised and rewarded. That's what it's supposed to be. What's a little bit questionable in this definition is that challenging behavior is ignored when it happens. I think that's a little simplistic. I used to have signs all over my house that would say, reward good behavior, ignore bad behavior, which is very simplistic and not, it doesn't cover the nuances for it. But the basic principle is that we all do things for a reason, and sometimes we do things for attention. And so a lot of times our kids will engage in challenging behaviors for attention. And if it is for attention, what we don't want to do is give attention to it. So, for instance, it's not unusual if a child is in an ABA program or EIBI, but even for older kids, if there's a group of adults sitting in a room, let's say it's a 14-year-old and the 14-year-old is swearing and just dropping that F-bomb, right? In most households, if a 14-year-old was just swearing, somebody would start giving that person a lecture and say, hey, we don't do that. We don't cotton to that kind of talk here. Watch your language. We don't do that, right? In an ABA household, if it was determined that this person is doing this for attention to get a rise out of everybody, everybody would be very busy looking at their phones, whatever, and not give it any attention at all. Because then the person learns, oh, that's not a good way to get attention. Maybe I say, excuse me, and I get attention and it goes away. But to carte blanche just say challenging behaviors are ignored when they happen, that's a little misleading to me because we don't ignore behaviors that are challenging unless it's something that somebody is doing for attention. So there we go. But at the heart of this, what's the premise behind EIBI, Early Intensive Behavioral Intervention? And it's the studies that showed that think of it this way, if you're going to go to the gym and you want to make a difference in how your body, looks and feels, and you make the decision to go a half an hour 3 times a week, okay, that's not nothing. But is it going to make a substantive change that you will notice and that other people will notice? I mean, maybe, but not a huge change, right? As opposed to If you decided that you were going to devote 2 hours a day, 6 days a week, and you're going to go to the gym, is your result going to be different than if you just go a half an hour? Of course it's going to be different. Now, bump that up. If you decide to go to the gym 6 hours a week for 6 days a week, now we're talking about compound interest, because in the first week you're going to make such a substantial change that when you get to the second week, you have a different place that you're starting from. And it's just going to grow and grow and grow, and this is how people get chiseled. Now, that's not everybody's goal. Everybody doesn't want to be chiseled. But let's transfer this to something else. Let's say that you want to learn how to speak Mandarin, right? You're like, I have a passion for, I want to learn how to speak Mandarin. Whenever we're teaching language, what do the experts say about teaching language? They say it's got to be immersive, which is really another word for intensive. That the more hours that you have, the more opportunities to learn it, the faster you will learn it, and the more proficient you will become. So when we talk about children who are on the spectrum, what are the two things that qualify them for the diagnosis of autism? One would be a deficit, some amount of deficit in communication, and some amount of deficit in social communication. Those are both things that take intensive amounts of practice to become proficient at. So what the studies showed was if kids had more hours, they became more proficient. It's not out of line, right? It makes common sense. But the studies bore it out. It happens to be true. It makes sense, and it's true, and it's been studied thousands and thousands of times. Park has said, good afternoon, Shannon from England. Always difficult to judge when to push more and when to pause due to sensory regulation. Oh, that's such a good point, because with all ABA, the individual has to be taken into consideration. It has to be fun. You know what Dr. Grampiche says, it has to be fair. And when we have sensory issues going on, automatically the playing field, we got to be very careful about what is fair. My question for you, Park, is what are we doing about the sensory stuff aside from when it comes up when we're learning? What kinds of things are we doing to help that person? Because I don't know what exactly the sensory issues are, and they're vastly different what the intervention would be. But what are we doing to help them? In some instances, like for kids who have a hard time dealing with noise in the background, we might be doing a systematic desensitization where slowly, and we're allowing them to control it, where the amount that they can handle goes up. But in other cases, it's taking a break from it. So my question is, what are they doing to help with that? And they go on to say, academic classroom will not always be fun with busy environment, one teacher and 30 peers. Yeah, but it can be more fun. And you're in England, and so in England, you don't have the same rights that we have over here with IEPs. But it can be a conversation with how can we make it more fun. Excuse me. And if we really can't get the school to play ball, right? And we really got to keep them in that, then what we can do is a deferred fare. That there were times when my son would be at school and I wouldn't be in control of what they were doing at school. There were dietary things that he couldn't have, and somebody else would bring the cupcakes for somebody else, and he couldn't have them, and I wasn't there, and and now suddenly it's not fair. Everybody else is getting the cupcakes. So I made a deal with my son, and we had to work on so that he could trust that this was true, that if something wasn't fair at school, there would be something that was equal and even, extra special, fabulous when he got home. He loved that. And so that for him, every child is different, but for him that was enough to maintain so that he was willing to go through things at school that weren't fun. So there's always a way. They go on to say, hit others in busy church Bible group. Yeah, well, excuse me. When an individual is hitting, right, that's sort of the extreme of, I don't have a way to tell you, so I'm gonna do this. What we need to do is figure out, like that busy environment at church may not be appropriate right now. right? Until they have learned the skills of being able to say, I need a break, right? It's interesting. I want to continue talking about this, but I also want to bring in our guest because I think he might have some things to say about all of this as well. Our guest today, as I mentioned before, one of my favorite people, and I've known him for I think a little over 15 years, maybe 16 years now. I do want to say that I consider him a friend, and he's somebody that I love and respect. And I said to him before we started the show that he has been a guiding light for me as a parent. Having him as a friend and being able to talk to him about things has helped me more than I can even begin to describe. I don't want to tell you too much about him because I want him to describe himself, but I also do want to say that I am also friends with his mother, but an entirely different relationship. As on the drive-in, I was thinking, I can only think of one time I've ever been in the same room with both his mother and with him. So I'm very thrilled to be able to say that, you know, my relationship with him is purely with him as an adult, and that is so meaningful to me. So who am I talking about? I'm talking about the wonderful Nick Yates. He's a fantastic autism advocate and a speaker. I've had the opportunity of speaking on the same bill with him. He is an inspiration. Let's welcome Nick back to the show. Nick, so good to see you.
Hi, Shannon. Great to be with you, and thank you for having me.
I'm so thrilled. So Nick, you know, for people who don't know you and maybe haven't seen you on the show before, I really didn't, I want you to tell your story. Tell us about Nick and everything you want to tell us about you.
Well, yes, absolutely. There certainly is a lot to say here because my relationship with autism is twofold in the sense that I was both a professional in the field of ABA and also a client. And I think it's really important to start out by providing some background behind what led me, to where I am now, what I've been through, and a lot more. So I mentioned that I was a client of ABA in the past. And the first time my family noticed that I was showing signs of being different from other kids was when I was 2. I didn't start speaking before that age, and learning to do so was difficult. And I also wasn't playing with friends and classmates as others around me were doing, and I had a lot of difficulty transitioning between environments. And I was so used to doing things in a certain way on the daily that I was inflexible. I couldn't take any changes whatsoever. And I also exhibited signs of self-stimulatory behavior, constantly looking at objects like traffic lights or the sides of places. And while my parents noticed this from the beginning, autism in those days, we're talking the early to mid-90s here, was still relatively unknown disorder at the time, and my family didn't really know much about it and its characteristics and traits and symptoms. And it wasn't until I turned 4 that it clearly became evident to them what I was struggling with. And it was then after a period of time in which I was having lots of behavioral and social problems at school, it all culminated with a phone call from my teacher to my parents. Basically, she explained to them that I wasn't functioning in class, meaning that whereas other kids were socializing, I myself was lying on the floor, curled up in a ball.
Oh.
And in response, my parents took me to see a doctor who diagnosed me with high-functioning autism and an IQ of only 83. My parents were told that chances were I'd have to be put in a special ed program at a public school, yet knowing the reputations of such programs, my parents began looking into other alternatives. And it wasn't easy in the beginning, as it was difficult for my folks to find additional help for me, as autism was still relatively unknown. But it was eventually through a referral that my parents came across an ABA provider by the name of the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, or CARD for short. And as with many other providers, their goals were to teach all of its clients the functional skills necessary to replace previously learned maladaptive or inappropriate behaviors, thereby allowing them to learn and live independent and productive lives. And this is achieved by developing unique and individualized behavioral programs based on each client's particular strengths and weaknesses, and then breaking learning tests into very small increments, otherwise known as applied behavior analysis, or ABA, as previously mentioned. So once my parents found out more about CARD, they became convinced that they had the most well thought out solutions to my issues. And so it was I began ABA services at 4.5 years old, August 1994, and I endured weekly one-on-one therapy of 25 to 40 hours at different times, which included a half day in regular preschool and lots of hours of work after school and on weekends. And for a long time, I had other people structuring my time for me, and I was constantly being redirected and having my way of doing things corrected.
Can I ask you a question, Nick? Can I interrupt you for just a second and ask you a question?
Sure, no
How,
problem.
so you started at 4.5.
Yes.
How, and this, people always ask my son this too. How much of that do you think you remember? Like, when I think about what I remember from 4.5, I don't have a whole lot of memories, but I'm curious. Do you have a lot of memories of that time period?
There certainly are, particularly the situations where things were challenging or something had
Got
a
it.
certain impact on me.
Okay.
So I can tell you, once I started learning all these basic skills of, working on what I needed to improve, my challenging behaviors began to increase. But it wasn't easy in the beginning because not only did I have to endure those hours of therapy, but it was difficult for me to do what I believed myself to be incapable or saying of doing because making mistakes in the process would leave me frustrated. There's one time in particular I recall
I'm so
where
sorry.
I had to count a row of 6 blocks in order, during which I constantly messed up, and it left me angry and frustrated and confused and upset. But over time, I improved, and as I did so, I started seeing how this was helping me, and I was encouraged to keep trying with a lot more courage and determination than I had before. And things were a lot different then with ABA compared to what they are now, in the sense that other memories I recall were like working with my supervisors and therapists at times. We would go on outings, and as I was saying, services from when I was younger were much different than they are now, in the sense that there's a lot more things clients and therapists would do outside of normal sessions, whereas now the interactions are more restricted solely to the session centers, homes, schools, and in the community. And I have a lot of memories, particularly of going to movies, to the park, water skiing, amusement parks, and even being babysat for at times. One thing I really remember the most is the falling. It was when I was around 8 or 9. There was a therapist who took me out to meet his mother. And not only was she a very nice lady, but she was really sweet, where she went out of her way to knit me a gray wool sweater. And I hadn't forgotten about this until more recent years, but when I recalled it, I was really moved because I realize now, compared to then, that that kind, generous gesture really moved me, for it acknowledged me as a human being and that I mattered at the time when I was struggling with this neurological disorder. And struggling to fit in socially at school and in society. And it was in those moments when those on my team would go out of their way to do such nice things that really meant the most, for they made me feel very valued. And I really loved the therapists who went out of their way to encourage me and make me feel valued and worked hard to build a relationship with me.
Yeah.
And by making that effort to show just how much they cared about me and saw my potential, it gave me the encouragement and confidence and motivation to try hard, do my best, and believe in myself. At the same time, there are memories of ABA that weren't always pleasant for me.
Yeah.
I mean, there were times where I would be defiant by refusing to participate in sessions, going as far as to run away one time. Sometimes I felt that those sessions were too much to handle, that I couldn't do what was expected of me. And so my impression at the time was that the best way to not have to deal with this was to avoid being at them altogether. An example of this being when I ran away from a session during first grade. I went biking. My father went out driving to find me, and he wasn't happy with me when I returned home. But even at that age, I could see how much that worried him and my mother.
Yeah.
And following that, I did not try to ditch a session again. There were also times when therapists came across, in my mind and in my perception, as strict and mean towards me if I said or did something that was not compliant. At such a young age, and still very much so to this day, I was very sensitive to what people said and did, and had the tendency to take things quite literally. And some of my therapists really impacted me at a young age with how they came across to me and their choice of words. And that really stuck with me for a long time. And this is where I say this, as I've said many times before, I cannot stress enough the importance of being aware of how what one says does can impact the thoughts and feelings of individuals on the spectrum, given these tendencies to take things literally and they're having trouble with perspective taking.
Yeah.
And nowhere was I reminded any more of this when I had an encounter with a former therapist about a decade on from when they had last worked for me. And I started crying because the memories were still very painful and strong. But the good thing is we were able to talk it through, and I'm able to still have a good relationship with them.
Okay. So interesting. And we always talk about on the show how important it is to listen to what the people who are receiving the therapy, how they feel. It hurts me, Nick, to think that obviously there's a certain amount of frustration that we expect, right? But we talk about all the time on the show that no child should be ever left in frustration, and that self-esteem and having it be fair are the guidelines for everything. But, you know, it didn't feel that way to you, and that is non-negotiable. There's like no arguing that. But I'm curious to know, I know you've been through a lot over the years about this, how you, because then eventually you worked in the field. But now at the age that you're at, how do you recommend to people that they do ABA? Do you recommend to parents that they be mindful of these things? Where are you at right now?
I certainly would encourage, people to, do the research about it, but ultimately everybody has to figure out for themselves what they feel is ultimately best for them. So I'm not going to really try to recommend saying they need to do this or what have you. But there is certainly no question what the potential can be, and especially if you start early. Because the age at which I was when I was diagnosed 4.5 is now considered late. Because the less of a gap there is between the chronological age and the mental age, the chances are, it's going to make more of a difference in the long run by being able to start early.
Yeah.
So, I certainly, like I say, I encourage people to do their research and determine what may be the best for them, whether it's that or something similar. But the thing we have to realize is just that, every ABA program is different for everybody. Everybody is different. So it could be that there's something else that may be better for them, and that's okay. But It's like I said, I think it's really important to, really do your research and ask those questions, especially the clarifying ones, because you want to ensure, especially if you're a parent or a caregiver, that it would ultimately be in the best interest of your kids.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how you mentioned the fact that I worked as a field, because in addition to having been a client at CARD, I worked there for a period of time. There were internships I had summers of 2011 and 2012.
That's how we met. I had just started working there, and you were an intern, and so we had opportunity to meet, and it was I loved getting to know you. But then continue on, because that wasn't the only time you worked at CARD.
And then after, I ended up back where I grew up in LA because of situations in life that didn't work out for me. I had the opportunity to work there on a full-time basis. And I was there for nearly 2 years. And I did a lot of work, pertaining to insurance matters for the funding of services through, various insurance carriers. And the work that I did a lot was very rewarding. Absolutely, for sure. I could also say at the same time, however, it was challenging because of the fact that I had been on both sides of the coin.
Sure.
And had a lot of history, not only, with Dr. Grambichet, but several other people at CARD.
Yeah.
These are people I've known for, at this point, 3 decades, which is crazy to think of.
Right.
And there were a lot of things that happened that certainly, were on my part, because I really didn't know any better as far as like the rules of conduct in the business world, because up to that point, I'd not really ever worked in the corporate setting on such a large scale or full time. And as much as there were things I struggled with, there were certainly my part. I certainly take action. I certainly take ownership and responsibility for my actions and behaviors then. I also feel what really could have helped me then at the time was if at the very start I was given the whole laydown of like how things work as far as, like what you should say and do, what you should not say and do in order to do well in such an environment. And I think it's really important for employers to be cognizant and mindful of that. Employees may not always be fully aware of these things, especially people on the spectrum, because it's not always easy to read people. Certainly for me, that's something that's still a struggle for me that I'm trying to work on. And as much as there were times that were challenging, I am grateful for the lessons that I learned and how I applied them over time. There are a lot of mistakes I have made then and other times in my life that I'm not proud of. But for what I've gained from those experiences and how I applied them, it's really made a huge difference for me in being successful.
And you are successful. We should address that. You are a very successfully employed person, coming to us from your home, which you live in with you're very happily married. That, I don't know how much you want me to say, but, it was during that period of time that you met your wife, your lovely wife, who I know and appreciate, who does work in the field still. And listen, can I tell you how happy everybody was that you guys found each other? It was just delicious that you guys, and we love that. We loved getting to see you blossom into a husband, and launch into your life. And you have launched into your life very successfully. You are, but you are also a very introspective person, and I appreciate that you have done the work on all of this and processed all of it. And sometimes you will share with some of us, and I'm lucky to count myself as that, as you kind of are figuring things out and as an adult. I want to backtrack just a little bit and say, what words do you use to describe yourself in relation to autism now, Nick? Do you? Yeah.
I certainly describe myself as a person on the spectrum. High functioning autism. There's no doubt about it. And I can tell you for the longest time, I tried, running away from it, not really wanting to have anything to do with it, just because of challenges of not only being blind and working in the field, but because of the fact that growing up, it was really hard for me to fit in and be accepted, especially because I went to school with mostly the same people from kindergarten through 12th grade. But I really like to think that college certainly helped me start to become more accepting of it and more comfortable, because I was finally in a place, where no one knew about my history. So it really enabled people to meet me for who I was at the time, more so than having a preconception about who I was based on my past. I could also say that for as grateful as I am for the work I did in the field, both at CARD and then at another similar provider after I left there, it was started getting to points where I was burning out, because again, being on both sides of that coin can make things difficult.
Yeah.
So I ultimately needed the space and time away from the field and anything having to do with ABA and autism to really learn a lot more than I could have at the time, and to really appreciate it and feel good about it again. Yeah. So my wife was mentioned. After I left CARD, that was when we started getting serious. Our first year together, we were long distance because she was out in Henderson in the Las Vegas Valley. I was still in LA. But it was then after I left my last employer 6 years ago, I made the move to live out with her, and I started working for my current employer, Gallagher Bassett. Gallagher is a third-party administrator that handles insurance claims. They're headquartered outside of Chicago. They've been around for a good century, have tens of thousands of employees statewide and worldwide. I work for their center of excellence in Vegas.
Wonderful.
And having been there for 6 years as of yesterday, crazy how fast time has flown by, I've done a number of different things. What I currently do now is I handle the submission of motor vehicle reports, which are submitted by clients to find out if, drivers they employ pose risk transporting things for them. So that's something I'm currently doing. I'm also currently enrolled in some designation coursework offered by the company along the lines of commercial lines underwriting. So doing a lot of studying about stuff pertaining to that. And I'm really glad that I made the decision to leave the field altogether, because I really wanted to, for once, be somewhere where I didn't have any association with the field it provides, or it's primarily based on like my personal experiences, or for that matter, not having known anybody before. And I really think that was also what enabled me to take all the feedback I had gotten in years prior and apply that, because the distinctions between professional and personal were a lot clearer to me in that situation. Whereas I think at Card and my previous employer, it could definitely get blurred for me at times.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I remember at times feeling frustrated that, I didn't realize then what I know now. But life is about, learning. And sometimes it really takes those moments of challenge to help you know what to do.
Yeah.
Something that I was reminded of the other day is the fact that you find so much about who you are as much from your failures as you do your successes.
Amen.
You sometimes need to go through that stuff to really grow.
Yeah.
And adapt and evolve. And I can tell you something I constantly struggled with since I was a young kid is sometimes I feel like pressure on the daily to try to be able to do things right. Because for the longest time, I always had this impression that society expects a lot more from people who don't always fit the definition of quote unquote normal.
Yeah.
But you've got to realize that at the end of the day, there really is no one definition of what it means to be normal. And everybody is going through their own battles in life, whether you can clearly see them or not. So I've really been trying to work on giving myself a lot more grace and trying not to beat myself up and be so hard on myself. And I can certainly tell you, these last 3 years since I had some significant personal challenges, I've been in therapy, and my therapist has really offered me a lot of great advice that's enabled me to see things in a way I couldn't before.
Yeah.
And I also give so much credit to my wife for that, because there are things she helped me to see that maybe I wasn't seeing before, and there is no question that I am a better person because of her. So
that's a lovely thing to say.
I just take everything that I've been through and I just look back, and as hard as some things may have been, I wouldn't be who I am without them today.
Which is so powerful. I also want to say, one of the things that you have taught me, Nick, is that we're all learning. I had just started working at Card when you came and did your internship. You were one of, there were 4 of you that were there that summer that were working at Card. 3 of you, I think. And that were all on different places but had been clients before. And that were helping out with different things. You all had something that you were bringing to it elevated what we were all doing, without a doubt. Everybody said that. And then it was a few years later, after you had finished college, that you came back, but I was also working in the same office with you then. And listen, you were a joy and a treat to work with, but there was a learning curve for me, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, that I learned that I needed to be a little bit more flexible when I was working with you. And that, like, I remember thinking, well, I'm a parent. I understand what's going on. This should be easy for me, but it required me to learn and grow. And I was excited to do that because I knew you and you were a joy and a treat. But it needs to be said, I needed to learn and grow. And I think that we all need to humble ourselves a little bit. And I will say, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I will say that there were some people who were not in a space where they were willing to learn and grow. And they needed to get in that space, right? And I think we all have days and moments where we're like, well, I'm used to doing it this way. I'd like to do it this way because that's what's comfortable for me. And somebody else comes in, whether it's that they're on the spectrum or something else, and it requires you to learn and grow. It's not easy for everybody. But I was really proud of you. I was proud of all of us who recognized it as an opportunity to learn and grow. And I have to say to you, I don't know that I've ever said this to you, but then later on, there was another opportunity when I had someone that I was working with that was vastly different than you, but also on the spectrum. And I had a leg up because I already knew that I had a responsibility. That it wasn't just about having them fit to what we were doing, but about fitting ourselves around each other. And you had already taught me that. And I just think if every employee and every employer could get that lesson one or two times, we'd be in a different place.
Well, I very much appreciate you saying that, Shannon. I also certainly want to give a shout out to Doreen and everybody else who was there at the time I was working there for their patience with me and for hanging in there with me as I went through my learning curve, like you said, because it wasn't always easy for me. Was certain things I said and did, the impacts they had were the intentions were the impacts were intentional, and I know that sometimes I could be a lot to deal with. But
joy. You
again,
were joy
it's
and a
all
treat.
about being able to own it and how you apply what you learn. So I very much appreciate you saying that.
You were a
So
joy. You were a joy and a treat. And we love you exactly as you are, Nick. Let there be no mistake about that. But in terms of, I don't know if you listened at the beginning, but I did the whole talk about EIBI.
I did hear it.
And I'm very passionate about EIBI unapologetically. Of course, Nick, I am about it, and Dr. Grampiche talks about this every week, that it's got to be fair and that we should only ever be doing things that are building a person's self-esteem. I recognize that that's hard to do and that we have to have high-quality technicians who are mindfully doing these therapies and, as you said, remembering this is a human being. But from your point of view, and I heard a little bit of both. I heard that, this helped you, but that there are some things that didn't go well for you. But for the parents that are watching now, I know you don't want to endorse and say you should do this. You said that they should research it. But if you were in that position as a parent, what would you do, knowing what you know?
I certainly would do everything I can to figure out, what the challenges are. Like I said, do my research, meet with professionals, and certainly families who've been through something similar, and really just try to, determine what is the best course of action and in the best interest of my kid, if that were the case.
Yeah.
And something I really am glad is we're seeing a lot more in the field are efforts for greater compassion.
Yes.
Executive functioning.
Yes.
Because while grateful for, what the field had done for me as a person, as a professional, there really wasn't a lot of that earlier on. And I feel that had that been the case, it would have made life a lot easier for me growing up and feeling, good stuff was seen, being kind to myself, not being hard on myself, oppressing myself, or beating myself up
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
And because at the end of the day, we have to remember that the clients are human and that what they feel matters, even if it may be in certain cases, they can't easily express that because, let's say, they're nonverbal.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that they can sense things from the inside.
Yeah.
And I had a very interesting experience about a year ago. So as I'm sure some of the audience out there knows, Dr. Gran Pichet was mentored by none other than Ivar Lovas.
Yeah.
His son, Eric, is not only also in the field, but he happens to live out here in the Vegas Valley. So when it was that I went to an event that my wife was tabling at, he was there and he gave me the opportunity to meet him. And now I realize and respect the fact that, of course, there are all these mixed opinions about, his father, among others. And, of course, we get all these different perspectives about the good and the bad of ABA. Certainly, I have my concerns there, believe it or not. But at the same time, you have to still make those distinctions. And what it really did for me, it was like a full circle moment in that I was able to say, if it weren't for your dad, I really don't know where I would be today. And it just gave me a chance to say thanks. And he was very kind to me. He had, took a picture together. We were in touch here and there.
Yeah.
And I'm very encouraged, again, like I said, that we are seeing this openness towards, improving the field, because the fact of the matter is ABA is science and it's constantly evolving and improving and changing.
Yeah.
And I think in recent years, this is really the first we're seeing a lot of adults on the spectrum, like myself, who've been through this. We're starting to hear a lot more, feedback about the good and the bad of the field. And that is really important and necessary, as hard as it may be.
Yeah.
Because if it is that we are to be better people, the field is to do better, we have to make those efforts to be, diversive and inclusive.
Yeah.
And consider those perspectives, because they offer something that you may have never really considered in the first place.
Absolutely.
And that's really important to me to see that, especially in these times that we're living in right now. Because I think if we have more of those conversations about, what makes people human, why they value this, what makes them feel this way about a certain thing, and why, it will lead to, I think, a lot of greater prosperity in the end. So there really is a lot that we can learn from each other, even if at times it is challenging, or we may not always see things eye to eye, but it's important.
Absolutely.
Something I've learned in life is that you don't necessarily always have to agree with people, but if at the very least you can make an effort to understand where they're coming from and what their intentions and their purposes are, then you're really on to something.
Absolutely.
So I really hope we continue to see more of those conversations happening.
Absolutely. And I love what you said, Nick, that this is a science, but the truth of the matter is that this science is carried out by individuals. And even in you telling us about your experience, that there were individuals that you did not feel were remembering that I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that they weren't kind. Whereas there were other people who carried out the science and made you feel special. So we know that's possible.
And here's what I want to say. In learning a lot more about myself and in going through therapy and different life experiences, for any of those who I'm still in touch with, it's good in part because I made the effort to say, you know what, I forgive you. Because I realize now that they were only doing what they knew best at the time. Mm-hmm. Maybe sometimes the impact wasn't the best, but I really, like I said before, was trying to make that effort to understand why things were as they were.
Yeah.
And I think that really helped me heal a lot, because there's definitely a lot of stuff that I've carried these last 2 to 3 decades.
Yeah.
I certainly can hold on to stuff, but I also realize how important forgiveness is, even if people may not ask for it, because it can ultimately help set you free.
Yeah.
And there's just been like a lot of weights on my shoulders, what I feel are a lot of burdens. And I don't want to be bogged down by stuff so much anymore. I'm just trying to make sure, again, that my relationships with people are good, and that I'm being kind to myself, and I'm trying to have as much positive energy that I can, especially with these times that we're living in. And I'm just trying to focus on what I can control and do to help make the world as best as it can be on my part.
Nick, we so appreciate that. We had some people write in. Joanne had said, "Hi, Shannon and Nick. So nice to be able to watch live today." And she said, "Nick, thanks for sharing your story." Park said, "Very good, Nick. It is our hope and dream, like you, for our son to be. Thank you for sharing. Motivates me to work hard for my son," which was wonderful. I just want to flip. We're really out of time, but I promised Park that we would go back. She had written in and said that they're struggling a little bit with that there are times that things like school and church aren't fun for her son, and that sometimes he hits, and that there's sensory things going on. I don't know if you heard any of that, Nick, if you wanted to say anything from your perspective as a person who, you were being asked sometimes just in life, not ABA necessarily, but in life, to go and do things that weren't fun for you and weren't interesting for you. And I think it's really important that we have compassion. Obviously, if we want our child to go to church, we want our child to go to church. But I do think we have to put it through the test. I can hear Dr. Grant-Boucher saying, but what's in it for them? Like in the beginning, they don't have, there's like, what is the paycheck for them going to church? This expectation that we think that they're going to be having that spiritual experience. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Nick?
Well, to Dr. Grant-Boucher's point, you certainly have to be mindful of that. And I think it's really important, again, just trying to, work on your relationships, try to help understand why it might be difficult for your kid. And also at the same time, try to help them understand, like, why doing this or that is significant, in life and in society. So it really is, I think, a balance of both of those things. And just, again, trying to build those relationships and ensure that, kids have, good time no matter what.
Yes.
And something I learned long ago is, stuff like students don't care about what you know until they know how much you care about them. This I know from my time as an academic tutor in AmeriCorps. So it's really just trying to, make that effort to understand why it might be tough for a kid, while still at the same time helping them to see why doing something like this is important or significant. I think that's really the best way I can answer it in a nutshell.
I love it.
So hopefully that helps somewhat.
And they responded back and said, "Feel emotional. Thank you, Nick and Shannon. Makes me feel more confident to keep going." So that's all the time we have, Nick. It went so fast, but I'm so glad we got to catch up. Please give my love to your wonderful wife. And I had said to you before, it makes me so happy knowing that you guys are so happy. I don't get to see you very often, but I think of you often. And it's always good thoughts that you're living in your best life. And thank you for being willing to come in and talk with us.
Well, thank you, Shannon, of course. I'm always happy to come back on when time allows.
All right. And I do want to say, too, for those of you, if you have an organization or something that you'd like to have Nick come and speak at your organization, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you? I guess they could write to me and I could forward it to you, but is there another way?
There's certainly that. You have my LinkedIn, for instance, and, my other social media and what else. So my door's open.
Okay. So I know, lots of people are looking for a speaker to speak to their organization. Nick would be fabulous. As I said, I've been on the speaking stage with him before, and he does an amazing job. So, Nick, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, okay?
You too, Shannon. Thanks.
All
Keep
right.
doing what you do best.
Trying. All right, you
You
take
got it.
care. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
All right, you guys, that we're over time, but just such an amazing, amazing man, and such a privilege that I get to know him and have gotten to know him over all these years and to watch him grow into this adult. Absolutely amazing. We are going to be back with more programming on Monday. Can't wait. We've got some very exciting interviews coming up for you guys that you're going to love as we gear up towards April. Lots of surprises that you're going to enjoy. So make sure that you tune in on Monday. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much. See you next time.